You are what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for.
In today's video, I'm going to be sharing a really fun and easy way to stretch your stamps. So today we're going to be focusing on small, tiny stamps in some stamp sets that sometimes get overlooked. So for this technique, we're going to start with a piece of cardstock that measures 6 by 6 inches. And I'm going to draw an X down the center of this piece of cardstock. So I want it right down the middle, a gigantic X, and I'm just going to label this 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, just for the purposes of the video so I can explain to you what I'm doing. So I've got another piece of cardstock that's 6 by 6 inches. We're going to use that to stamp our final pattern in the end. This one that we're using right now is a template. So I'm going to be using the Jennycarddesigns Daisies Forever mini stamp set, and this comes in a little bundle with some layering stencils and dies. But for this technique, I'm just going to use the little tiny stamps in this set. We're pretty much going to use just about every single stamp in this little set. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working in one little section. I'm focusing on the number 1. I'm staying within that little sort of triangle area, and I'm going to load up my first stamp onto the door of my MISTI. I'll get it picked up, and I'm going to ink it up. I'm just using a craft ink for all of my template, just so I can get an idea of where to place my stamps. Now, I'm going to create a full pattern and fill this entire cardstock in 4 turns of this piece of paper. So I've got the first stamp loaded up where I want it. I'm going to turn it 1 turn. You can go left or right, it doesn't matter. Whichever way you start turning, you need to continue turning that way. So in this case, I'm turning left, and now I'm still focusing on that number 1 section. Okay, I'm going to go back to the stamp set and grab another stamp and line it up within that little section. I'll get it picked up with the door of my MISTI, and then I'll ink up both of those stamps, close the door of the MISTI and press, and now we see we have the second stamped image in that little section. And then in the section number 4, we have the first stamped image. And this will fill in as we go along. All right, so I'm going to pick up my cardstock, turn it 1 turn to the left, and we're still focusing on that section number 1. I'm going to grab some more stamps from my set, and because these are so small, I figure I could probably add a couple of stamps in each pass. At first, I wasn't sure how this would turn out, so I just stuck with 1, but as I moved along, I got a little bit more confident. So I've got the next couple of stamps loaded up into that section, and I'm going to ink up all the stamps again. And as you can see, when we repeat the pattern, that section starts to fill out. Okay, so now we're still focusing on section 1. I'm going to turn it 1 more turn, and I'm going to grab some more stamps, and I'm going to add it into this section, making sure that nothing overlaps. And as long as I'm working within section 1, I know that when I continue to stamp, that my stamps are not going to overlap and sort of touch each other. So as long as I stick within that little section, everything is going to work out perfectly. So I've got some more stamps loaded up onto the door of my MISTI. I'll ink up everything, close the door of the MISTI and press. Okay, and we're starting to really fill in here. I'm going to turn it 1 more time, and we're kind of back to where we started. And I'm still working in section number 1. I'm going to add my stamps into the little empty spaces in that first section. Okay, so I'm just grabbing a couple of more of those little images, and then once everything is sort of lined up, and you can check your pattern to see if you like it or if it has empty or blank spaces, you can always shift things around. But to get everything started, this is how I start my process. So I've got a couple of more stamps. I'm going to ink everything up, close the door of the MISTI and press. And we almost have that section filled in. We have a pretty good gap still left over. But I decided I'm just going to stamp everything in 4 turns and fill all of these quadrants with my pattern. Okay, so I'm just going to turn it 4 times. I'm going to ink everything up, close the door of the MISTI and press, open the door, turn it 1 turn, ink everything up, close the door of the MISTI and press. It's very repetitive, but the finished result is just so satisfactory. I love the gorgeous designs, and this technique can be used to stretch your stamps a million different ways. You can get a different look every single time, and it's just so much fun. And this entire basically pattern paper we created out of just a bunch of tiny little stamps in a stamp set that I've never really used before. So that's really fun. So once I have all of the stamps stamped in 4 turns around, now I can see where sort of my empty and dead spaces are. And this is where those little tiny words and sentiments from this stamp set will come in. I'm going to put them in and sort of fill in those little empty spaces. And it doesn't matter if they're crooked or sideways or upside down. The whole point of this is to be random. So I've got 4 more stamps loaded up onto the door of my Misty. I'm going to pick them all up, and then I'm going to stamp them all the way around to make sure nothing overlaps and everything kind of looks the way I want it to look. And then if anything does overlap or touch, I can always just pick it up and move it around. And as I said before, we're working on this piece of cardstock here. This is just our template. This is our sampler, just so that we can kind of perfect our design. And then I'll show you how we can preserve the perfected image. So I'm going to stamp this 4 turns, get it all stamped up to see where all the greetings land and what overlaps and what kind of needs work. Okay, and I shift anything around if I need to. Once I'm happy with a finalized pattern, I flip over my cardstock, I ink up all of the stamps, I close the door of the Misty and press, and now we have all of the stamps sort of like as a template of where to place them for future, so I can recreate the same pattern over and over again, which is just so much fun. So I've got my sort of test project, and then I have my sample template. All right, so now we're gonna put this to work here. I'm gonna grab my fresh piece of cardstock, and we're gonna clean up the craft ink off of those stamps, and I'm going to ink up with some ink cubes, and I'm going to use 4 different colors so we get a good look of how fun and cool this sort of like rotating design will look like. So I ink up with my first color. I'm going to turn it 1 turn, and I'm working towards the left. I typically do whenever I turn things. So I'll clean up those stamps. I'll switch over to a nice bright pink ink, and I'll ink up the stamps again. Close the door of the Misty and press. And now that we're not using just craft ink, you can really see this gorgeous, fun, vibrant pattern coming to life here. I'm going to pick up my cardstock, make 1 turn to the left, ink up with some nice bright blue ink. Beautiful. Love the way this is looking. And I'll pick up my cardstock, 1 more turn, last and final turn towards the left, ink it up with some green ink cube, close the door of the Misty and press. And look at that. Look at that fun and amazing, vibrant, colorful background that's just got so much going on. And we really, to make this pattern, once we have our template laid out, it only took a few seconds. Just ink it up, stamp and turn, and boom, we're done. And you could just go crazy with this technique. You can use all different sort of color patterns, make note card sets, and just so much fun. And now we have this template for future. If you really love this pattern, you can just keep this little cardstock with your stamps and then have it for future, so you can recreate this gorgeous pattern paper background. So I, of course, went to town and did a whole bunch of these. I tried different color combinations and just had some fun with it, played with my ink cubes, and I made a bunch of backgrounds. So I'm going to turn one of them into a card. I took one of my patterns and I cropped it sort of like to the bottom right, so it didn't look like, you know, perfect symmetrical pattern. It kind of was more fun, and I like the way that looks. So I've got some punches and some scrap paper, and I'm just going to punch out a scallop and then a white circle. I used some purple cardstock to create a matte layer and a little strip belly band across the front, and popped on my little punches there. I stamped a sentiment. I also added a couple of those flowers and created a little flower with a little center and some leaves, and I thought that was super cute. And then that's it. Super simple. I didn't want to do too much to this card. I really wanted that background to be the focus. So I took this panel, I glued it to a white cardstock base, and we have this super fun and gorgeous pattern. Think of all of the stamps in your stamp collection that you could use to do this. You could use different themes. You could make Christmas backgrounds, you can make birthday backgrounds, you could just make sentiments or flowers or leaves or little critters, anything that you want, and really just mix and match all your stamp sets, pull it together and make amazing fun backgrounds. And then save a little sample template so that you can come back to it later and remake the same pattern if you really love it. Okay, I hope this video has got you inspired and got your brain working and thinking about all the fun ways that you can use the stamps that you have in your collection. Coming up on screen is a playlist of videos that I think you may enjoy. Have yourself a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!